Sources have confirmed to NBC News that President Biden and his senior staff are discussing the possibility of preemptive pardons for potential targets of President-elect Trump's vows of retribution. The discussions potentially opening a Pandora's box of presidential power. Sources familiar with the discussion say no decisions have been made by Biden or his team and that there's no consensus. There's also no official list of names, but among the names that have come up so far are people Donald Trump has singled out for potential revenge, like Senator-elect Adam Schiff, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, and Dr. Anthony Fauci. This afternoon, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre saying she would not get ahead of the president on any potential pardons, but signaling that more pardons or commutations will be made. The news comes after President Biden drew backlash from both sides of the aisle for his sweeping pardon of his son Hunter, after repeatedly and unequivocally pledging he wouldn't. Jean-Pierre addressing that decision at the first White House briefing since that pardon and ensuing backlash.
I know what I said. I know what the president said. That is where we were at the time. There has been some circumstances that have changed this, right? Republicans not letting up, saying they won't stop. They're going to continue to do this. I mentioned the recent Trump appointees of legal enforcement positions, right? That said during the campaign they would have, they were out for retribution, and so no reason to not take them for the word.
We should note preemptive pardons have been used by presidents in the recent past. But earlier today, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries suggesting this use of pardon power is not where the president's focus should be in his final days in office.
We've had no communication with the White House as it relates to potential pardons with respect to any sitting members of Congress or former members of Congress. It has been the perspective that many of us have shared that there are working class Americans all across the country who've been caught up in an overly aggressive criminal justice system that at times has gone too far in terms of excessive sentencing as it relates to non-violent offenders who do not present any risk to society and are prepared to contribute to the well-being of society. To the extent that the Biden administration is considering additional pardons moving forward, it's my suggestion that that is where the focus should be at this point in time.
Sources tell NBC News there is separate work being done on Biden's clemency power in criminal justice cases. The discussion's coming as the president-elect has made no bones about flexing his own presidential image and power weeks before his second term officially begins. This weekend, the president-elect will be back on the world stage during a trip to Paris for the reopening of the Notre Dame Cathedral. It comes as Trump continues to fill his administration at a furious pace, announcing 4 new picks last night with a focus on homeland security positions. The president-elect also appearing ready to challenge Senate Republicans on his most polarizing cabinet choices, with doubts on Capitol Hill around his pick for defense secretary. This morning, Trump posting his support for Pete Hegseth on social media, writing, quote, "His support is strong and deep, much more so than the fake news would have you believe. Pete is a winner, and there is nothing that can be done to change that." Joining me now is senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. Garrett Hake is here with me on set with the latest on the Trump transition. And for more on the power of presidential pardons, I'm joined by NBC News legal analyst and criminal defense attorney Danny Savalas. Thank you all so much for being here. Kelly, I want to start with you at the White House. Look, Hakeem Jeffries seemed to be giving some sort of gentle admonishment of the administration when asked about this preemptive pardon reporting. So behind the scenes, are Democrats frustrated with how the White House is approaching this process?
Well, there's certainly a time now, with 45 days left in the president's term, for there to be a lot of excessive advocacy, lobbying, and so forth for those that various groups think deserve this kind of presidential protection. And Karine Jean-Pierre acknowledged that when a president is about to leave office, there is an expectation that he will use that power extensively. And we have a few different buckets here. And Hakeem Jeffries, who is the leader of Democrats on Capitol Hill, is certainly arguing for a more robust use use of commutation or pardoning power for those who have been convicted, who have served whatever penalty they were required, and as he described it, nonviolent offenders. So drug cases and those kinds of things where people's lives could be substantially improved if they were out from under the weight of these convictions. And we get the impression from our reporting and from what Karine Jean-Pierre said publicly today that that kind of a candidate in a large group is likely going through that process now, that is part of the review for use of the clemency power. The other sort of bucket is this broader, more unconventional, preemptive pardon power, which in many ways is intended to protect from investigation, from potential prosecution, from conviction, a group of people that the White House considers to be vulnerable. And it's not just that there is any kind of a suggestion that there is wrongdoing that's been done, but the process of Washington being put through investigation is a costly and difficult one, and they're trying to preempt that, in essence, if that does in fact go forward. Gabe?
So, Kelly, how is the recent Hunter Biden pardon playing into all this? I know Karine Jean-Pierre seemed frustrated answering questions about that still at the White House briefing today.
Well, it was litigated a lot at the briefing today because it was, as you noted, the first on-camera briefing in a formal sense since that pardon was granted from father to son, president to citizen. And so there was a lot that needed to be sort of put on the record. And she did revert to the president's own statement many times. The impact of a pardon like this is when any president does something controversial, it does cast a shadow, and others who believe there should be clemency offered in different directions or explanations given will certainly try to fill that void. We're seeing that now. There are Democrats who believe that the use of the pardon for the president's son is a way of perhaps giving a free pass to Donald Trump when he returns to office to grant pardons as he would like. So there's some frustration among Democrats about that, and this desire to see others who could benefit from it also be given pardons or commutations.
Yeah, is there concern, Kelly, that some of these preemptive pardons could actually be rejected?
Well, there's been some talk of that in the sense that individuals don't want to say that they, the typical use of a pardon power is when someone acknowledges wrongdoing, often is paid the price for it, and then accepts that mercy from the president. This would be different, and so it may be the case. For example, Senator-elect Schiff of California says he doesn't want that kind of protection, doesn't believe he needs it. Other names have been floated publicly. We don't have specific comments from them, but certainly the idea of those in Washington who recognize when people are put through this process of investigation from committee level to actual prosecution, there's a lot that is involved in it, and it can be very stressful and costly, and perhaps that's what the White House is seeking to give some relief there. A lot of distance to go, Gabe.
Kelly O'Donnell, live for us at the White House. Kelly, thank you. I want to turn now to Garrett. Hey, Garrett, have we heard any reaction from the Trump team to this pardon reporting?
Yeah, we have, in fact. Caroline Leavitt, who will take over the podium for Karine Jean-Pierre next year, said that what she had heard out of the briefing room today suggests that Karine Jean-Pierre had either been lied to or was lying to the American public when it comes to the Hunter Biden pardon, that all of President Biden's blanket statements that he wouldn't pardon his son were proven untrue, and that it reflects negatively on the credibility of this White House. Now, substantively beyond that, we haven't gotten anywhere in terms of these projected future pardons, but I think it's one more way for the Trump administration to kind of stick an elbow in the ribs of the outgoing Biden team here.
And Garrett, on another topic, today, for the first time, we heard from Donald Trump on Pete Hegseth for the first time. Why is he weighing in now?
That's a good question. Hegseth had a rocky start to the week on Capitol Hill, but the vibes around him certainly seemed to improve the second half of the week. He leaned in. He was told by senators and by Trump that he needed to fight for this position if he really wants it. And I think what we saw reflected in that Truth Social post is a recognition that he had done so. J.D. Vance went even further than that, by the way, today. He was in North Carolina and told reporters that Hegseth would be the guy, that he's not going to be taken down by the media, and that he's actually been making calls on his behalf, including to Joni Ernst, who could end up being the key player in this whole drama.
And so this weekend, Hegseth's lawyer says that Hegseth is going to fill out those FBI background check forms. What impact could that have next week? Could we start to see more senators back away from Hegseth depending on how that background check goes?
It could be a while before we see the results of that background check, perhaps not even till right before a confirmation hearing happens. So I wouldn't expect any big change, soon based on that. But I think there is a lot of concern on Capitol Hill and at Mar-a-Lago that there could be other shoes out there to drop on Hegseth. Hegseth has hung some of his defense on this idea that he is now a changed man, that so much of these stories about him happened 4, 5, 6, even more years ago, that he's...
But he's also saying some of those things are untrue.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, look, it's a multimodal defense here, Gabe, but to the degree that he can say, I'm not that guy anymore, that's really contingent on him not being that guy anymore, and there not being more recent things coming up that, would fly in the face of that argument.
So it doesn't seem that Trump pushed the Senate very hard on Matt Gaetz. Why is he sticking by Hegseth at this point?
Well, I think there's a risk here of this becoming a trend. I mean, Trump really was aggressive in his cabinet picks with people that he thought would be loyal to him, that he thought would shake up the system, that would be outside of kind of what a traditional Washington set of selections would look like. That was certainly the case with Gaetz and with Hegseth. Losing Gaetz quickly, then losing Hegseth immediately afterwards sets entirely the wrong tone. And they're not the last controversial nominees he's got up. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard has not set foot on Capitol Hill. She's supposed to be up there next week. Being 0-2 essentially before you even get to some of the more controversial nominees is not where the president-elect wants to be.
Garrett Haig covering the Trump transition. A lot to watch over the next few weeks. Garrett, thank you.
You bet.
I want to turn now to Danny Savala. So, Danny, what is your reaction to these preemptive pardon discussions?
Well, preemptive pardons are fascinating because they're incredibly rare. First, broad pardons like the one given to Hunter Biden, very rare. But in a way, the Hunter Biden pardon was a preemptive pardon. Had Biden just pardoned Hunter on his specific 2 federal cases, it would not be preemptive. But when you cover a large swath of time, that's a preemptive pardon. So Biden's already done it. No reason he might not do it again. And in terms of pardoning a big group of people, that's been done as well. Washington pardoned the participants of the Whiskey Rebellion, and President Carter pardoned all the Vietnam draft dodgers, which numbered thousands of people. So there's plenty of precedent for this, and the pardon power is arguably the most broad power given to the president. It's virtually unreviewable. And if the president wants to pardon these folks preemptively for any and all conduct, as long as the conduct has already happened, that's what Supreme Court precedent tells us. That the only time limitation is that whatever they did, prosecuted, arrested or not, has to have already happened. You cannot pardon future crime. So,
Danny, you mentioned some examples of previous preemptive pardons, and you mentioned, for example, Jimmy Carter with the draft dodgers. Look, that was for a specific thing that he pardoned them for. These preemptive pardons, what's the scope of this? What would President Biden, how would the wording look for anybody that he's looking to preemptively pardon?
Any and all crimes, whether or not prosecuted. There's a Supreme Court case that actually would give some helpful language, and the limitations are very few, as long as it's any conduct that happened, whether prosecuted or not. It's exactly what he gave to Hunter Biden. Had he limited the Hunter Biden pardon to those 2 federal criminal prosecutions in California and Delaware, then that would have been specific. But instead, he covered an entire time period. So I'm sure if he does it, it will follow the same format as the Hunter Biden pardon, which is a preemptive pardon in part, other than the crimes that we know of and that the president mentioned specifically in his statement.
So is the only check on a president's pardon power essentially impeachment?
Yes, and I would argue that since the Supreme Court's immunity decision this past year, that it's even less checkable now because, let's say, for example, imagine a situation where a president pardons people that were arguably co-conspirators in a crime that he committed. This is exactly what one of the framers, George Mason, was worried about when they argued about whether to include the pardon power in the Constitution. They almost didn't include it, or at least there were those who argued against it, even though it came from the English tradition and was already in existence in the colonies. There were folks who didn't want the pardon power for exactly that concern. So it's strange that now, post-immunity decision, that exact conduct might not even be prosecutable. So yes, the short answer is it may be that the only check is impeachment and probably not even criminal prosecution for a criminal pardon.
And Danny, is accepting this pardon essentially an admission of guilt?
Oh, that is a thorny question. Supreme Court case from 1815 suggested that, yes, acceptance of a pardon is an admission of guilt. But in the modern era, that's probably not the case anymore. For example, I handle wrongful conviction cases, and often if you get a pardon, critical is whether or not it's a pardon based on actual innocence, because actual innocence is key to wrongful conviction payout statutes. So in the modern era, it's still an open, thorny question, but the more likely answer is that depending on the language in the pardon itself, that can control, a pardon may no longer be, per se, an admission of guilt.
Danny Savalas, our legal analyst. Danny, thank you so much.